The hunger gnawed at Nora Keating's empty stomach as she huddled on the cold church steps of Whispering Creek, Montana. Her thin shawl offering little protection against the autumn chill of 1878. Once a woman of comfortable means, the past year had stripped her of everything: her home, her dignity, and very nearly her will to live. Nora had been sitting there since dawn, watching townsfolk enter the whitewashed wooden church with their families, all dressed in their Sunday best. Nobody seemed to notice her, or perhaps they chose not to. She understood. A bedraggled woman with hollow cheeks and tattered clothes wasn't something the good people of Whispering Creek wanted to acknowledge on their day of worship. The morning service had ended an hour ago. Parishioners had filtered out, stepping around her as if she were merely another obstacle on their path, like a rock or fallen branch. Nora didn't blame them. She'd been traveling for so long, town to town, that she hardly recognized herself anymore. The beautiful daughter of a once prosperous Boston merchant had disappeared, replaced by this ghost of a woman with dirt under her fingernails and desperation in her eyes. She was contemplating whether to move on, though to where. She hadn't decided when the sound of boots against wooden steps made her look up. A tall man stood before her, his face shadowed by the brim of a well-worn cowboy hat. Unlike the churchgoers in their fine clothes, he wore practical riding attire: a simple cotton shirt, denim pants, and a leather vest that had seen better days. His boots were caked with dust from the trail, and a revolver hung at his hip, not for show, but as a necessary tool of survival in these untamed territories. "Madam," he said simply, his voice deep and gentle. In his hands was a cloth-wrapped bundle that steamed in the cool air. Without another word, he knelt down and placed the bundle in her lap. The warmth immediately seeped through her threadbare skirt, and the smell of fresh bread and roasted meat made her mouth water involuntarily. "I can't," she began, pride being the one possession she still clung to. "You can," he interrupted softly. "And you will." His eyes, when they finally met hers, were the color of the summer sky, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. Nora's hands trembled as she unwrapped the cloth to reveal a generous portion of beef, potatoes, and 2 thick slices of bread. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen so much food meant just for her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. The cowboy nodded once. "I'm Yates Grayson. I run cattle about 10 miles east of town." He hesitated, then added, "There's work at my ranch if you're looking. Nothing fancy, helping with cooking, cleaning. My last housekeeper left to get married last month." Hope, that fragile, dangerous emotion she'd tried so hard to smother, flickered to life in Nora's chest. "I'm Nora Keating," she replied, straightening her shoulders slightly. "And yes, Mr. Grayson, I would be very interested in work." Something in his expression shifted, perhaps surprised that she spoke like an educated woman, not the vagrant she appeared to be. "Finish your meal," he said. "I've got some business with the preacher, then I'll be heading back. You're welcome to ride along." He tipped his hat and climbed the remaining steps into the church. Nora watched him go, then turned her attention to the food. She wanted to devour it all at once, but forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite, knowing her shrunken stomach couldn't handle too much too quickly. As she ate, she considered the man's offer. She had no reason to trust him. A lone woman had to be careful in these territories, yet something about Yates Grayson's straightforward manner gave her comfort. More importantly, she had no better options. Winter was approaching, and she wouldn't survive without shelter and work. 20 minutes later, Yates emerged from the church accompanied by a gray-haired man in clerical garb. They spoke quietly at the top of the steps before shaking hands. The preacher glanced at Nora with kind eyes before returning inside. "Ready, Miss Keating?" Yates asked, extending a hand to help her up. Nora carefully rewrapped the remaining food, nearly half her portion, which she'd saved for later, and accepted his assistance. His hand was calloused but warm, strong as he pulled her to her feet with minimal effort. "I don't have much," she admitted, gesturing to the small bundle containing her only other dress, a hairbrush, and a locket with her parents' portraits, the last remnant of her former life. "Won't be needing much where we're going," he replied, picking up her meager belongings. "Horse is this way." Nora followed him to a magnificent chestnut stallion tethered to a hitching post. The animal was at least 16 hands high, with powerful muscles rippling beneath its gleaming coat. "This is Thunder," Yates said, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "Best cow horse in the territory." He secured her bundle behind the saddle, then turned to her. "Ever ridden before?" "Yes," she answered, remembering leisurely rides through Boston Common in what seemed like another lifetime, though it's been some time. He nodded, then without warning, placed his hands around her waist and lifted her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. Nora gasped, both from the sudden contact and the realization of how thin she had become. "I'll walk alongside for a spell," he said. "Let Thunder get used to your weight. When we hit the open trail, I'll ride behind you." As they moved down the main street of Whispering Creek, Nora felt the curious stares of townsfolk. She sat straighter in the saddle, chin lifted. Let them stare. Let them wonder about the hungry woman from the church steps riding away with Yates Grayson. "Mr. Grayson," she began once they'd left the last buildings behind, "I feel I should be honest with you. I've never worked as a housekeeper before." He glanced up at her, squinting against the sun. "What work have you done?" The question made her stomach tighten. I was raised to manage a household, not to serve in one. My father was a merchant in Boston before." She trailed off, unwilling to delve into the painful memories of her family's downfall. To her surprise, Yates chuckled. "Managing is exactly what I need, Miss Keating. My ranch hands can cook well enough for themselves, but they're making a mess of my house. I need someone with sense to keep things in order." The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. "Then I believe I can help you." They continued in companionable silence until they reached a wide stretch of prairie. Yates stopped Thunder with a gentle command and moved alongside the horse. "I'll mount up now," he said. "It'll be faster with both of us riding." Before Nora could respond, he swung himself into the saddle behind her in one fluid motion. His chest pressed against her back, and his arms came around her to take the reins. She stiffened instinctively at the intimate position. "Apologies for the closeness," he said near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "But it's 10 miles yet, and there's a storm brewing to the west. We need to make good time." Indeed, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Nora forced herself to relax. "I understand." Yates clicked his tongue, and Thunder broke into a smooth canter. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of the man behind her lulled Nora into a sense of security she hadn't felt in months. Despite her best efforts to stay alert, exhaustion overtook her, and she found herself leaning back against Yates's chest, her eyes growing heavy. "Rest if you need to," he said softly. "I won't let you fall." Those simple words, "I won't let you fall," broke something open inside her. When was the last time anyone had offered her protection? Tears pricked behind her closed eyelids, but she fought them back. Crying wouldn't help her now. She needed to be strong to prove her worth to this man who had shown her an unexpected kindness. As Thunder carried them across the rolling Montana landscape, Nora drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of the changing light as afternoon deepened toward evening, the distant rumble of thunder, and the steady heartbeat of the man who held her securely against him. She awoke fully when the horse slowed to a walk. Opening her eyes, she saw they were approaching a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley. A large 2-story house stood at the center, flanked by a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Smoke curled from the main house's chimney, and lamplight glowed in several windows. "Welcome to Grayson Ranch," Yates said, his voice a deep rumble she felt as much as heard. As they drew closer, Nora could see the care that had gone into building this place. The main house was constructed of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Unlike many hastily built frontier homes, this one had been designed to last, with proper glass windows and a slate roof. It spoke of permanence and prosperity. They rode into the yard just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. A young man rushed from the barn to meet them. "Cut it close with that storm, boss," he called, grabbing Thunder's reins as Yates dismounted. "That we did, Charlie," Yates replied, reaching up to help Nora down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, steadying her as her legs adjusted to solid ground after the long ride. "Miss Keating, this is Charlie Winters, one of my ranch hands. Charlie, Miss Nora Keating will be taking over as housekeeper. Charlie touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Madam, pleased to meet you. His curious gaze took in her disheveled appearance, but to his credit, his expression remained polite. Take good care of Thunder, Yates instructed. He carried double the whole way. Yes, sir, Charlie replied, leading the horse toward the barn. The rain was falling steadily now. Yates grabbed Nora's bundle and guided her toward the house with a gentle hand at the small of her back. Let's get you inside before we're both soaked through. They hurried up the porch steps as lightning flashed across the darkening sky. Yates opened the front door and ushered her into a spacious entryway. The immediate impression was one of masculine comfort, solid furniture, practical arrangements, but with an underlying disorder that spoke of a house without a woman's touch. It's not much, Yates said, watching her reaction, but it's home. Nora took in the muddy boot prints on the wooden floor, the stack of newspapers and mail on a side table, the coats hung haphazardly on pegs by the door. Despite its disarray, the house had good bones, as her mother would have said. It's lovely, she replied honestly. It just needs some attention. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. He hung his hat on a peg and ran a hand through his dark hair, which was streaked with premature silver at the temples. Come on, I'll show you to your room, and then we can see about getting you something to eat. He led her up a wide staircase to the second floor. My room is at the end of the hall, he explained, pointing to a closed door. This one will be yours. He opened a door to reveal a modest but comfortable bedroom with a single bed, dresser, washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window that would overlook the ranch yard in daylight. The previous housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, kept it neat, he said. Sheets are fresh, she saw to that before she left. Nora stepped inside, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of having a private room after months of sleeping in barns, under wagons, or when she could afford it in crowded boarding houses where she shared a bed with strangers. Thank you, she whispered. This is more than generous. Yates shifted awkwardly, clearly unused to dealing with emotional women. Well, I'll leave you to get settled. Bathrooms across the hall, we've got indoor plumbing, which is something of a miracle out here. There should be clean towels in the cabinet. When you're ready, come down to the kitchen. I'll heat up some stew. After he left, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the clean quilt. How quickly life could change. This morning, she'd been contemplating which town to try next in her increasingly desperate search for work. Now, she had shelter, the promise of food and employment with a man who so far had treated her with nothing but respect. It seemed too good to be true, and experience had taught her to be wary of apparent good fortune. Yet something about Yates Grayson's straightforward manner inspired trust. He could have taken advantage of her vulnerable position a dozen times since their meeting, but he hadn't. Gathering her courage, Nora crossed to the washstand and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above it was a stranger's gaunt, with dark circles under once bright eyes. Her chestnut hair, which had been her pride, hung limply around her face, dull with dust and neglect. She washed as best she could, changed into her slightly less worn dress, and attempted to bring order to her hair. The results were modest but improved. At least she looked less like a vagrant, and more like someone who might reasonably be employed in a respectable household. Downstairs, she followed the sounds and smells to the kitchen at the back of the house. Yates stood at a large cast iron stove, stirring something in a pot that filled the room with a savory aroma. He'd removed his vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. He glanced up as she entered. Feel better. Much thank you, she replied, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Have a seat, he said, nodding toward a wooden table surrounded by 4 chairs. Stew's almost hot. Nora sat and watched as he moved around the kitchen with the ease of a man accustomed to fending for himself. He sliced bread from a loaf, ladled stew into bowls, and set the table efficiently, if not elegantly. Hope you don't mind eating in the kitchen, he said, placing a steaming bowl before her. Dining room seems too formal when it's just me. "The kitchen is perfect," she assured him, inhaling the rich aroma of beef stew. Her stomach rumbled audibly, and she flushed with embarrassment. Yates pretended not to notice as he took the seat across from her. "Dig in while it's hot." "Mrs. Jenkins made this before she left froze portions for me. She was worried I'd starve without her." The stew was delicious tender chunks of beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions in a thick, flavorful broth. Nora forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite and breaking off small pieces of bread to soak up the gravy. "So, Miss Keating," Yates said after they'd eaten in silence for a few minutes, "what brings a Boston merchant's daughter to Montana territory?" The question was direct but not unkind. Nora considered how much to reveal. "Necessity," she finally answered. "My father's business failed after the Panic of '73. He didn't survive the shock." She stared into her bowl, unwilling to elaborate on finding her father hanging in his study after their creditors had taken everything. "My mother passed from influenza the following winter. I had no brothers or sisters, no close relatives willing to take me in." "I'm sorry," Yates said quietly. She nodded her acknowledgement. "I worked as a companion to an elderly lady for a time, then as a shop girl. But Boston held too many memories. I thought I might find better opportunities out west." Her laugh was brittle. "I was rather naive about what awaited me. The West can be hard on everyone," Yates agreed, "but especially on women alone." "Yes, well, I've learned that lesson thoroughly." She took another bite of stew, then asked, "And you, Mr. Grayson, have you always been in Montana?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, I came here after the war, after Appomattox. Couldn't go back home to Virginia, not after." He trailed off, then shrugged. "Anyway, I worked cattle drives for a few years, saved enough to buy this place in '68. Been building it up ever since. The war. Of course. Like so many men of his generation, the Civil War had shaped his path. Nora wondered which side he'd fought for, but decided it would be impolite to ask. The war had ended 13 years ago. Old divisions should be allowed to heal. "You've built something impressive," she said instead. His expression lightened. "It's coming along. Got about 2,000 head of cattle now, good breeding stock. 15 men working for me year-round, more during roundup and branding. And just you in this big house." "Just me," he confirmed. "Had dreams of filling it once, but..." He shook his head. "Life doesn't always go according to plan." There was a story there, Nora sensed, but it wasn't her place to pry. Instead, she asked about her duties, and they spent the remainder of the meal discussing practical matters: when meals should be served, which rooms needed regular attention, how the household accounts were managed. "I pay $15 a month plus room and board," Yates said as they finished eating. More than fair wages for these parts. It was indeed generous. Nora had worked 12-hour days in a Boston mercantile for less. "That's more than acceptable," she agreed. "Good. You'll have Sundays off, of course, and whenever else you need within reason." He stood and began clearing the table. "I don't expect you to start tomorrow. Take a day to rest and get your bearings." Nora rose to help with the dishes. "I'd prefer to begin right away. Idle hands have never suited me." Their fingers brushed as she took a plate from him, and she felt a curious flutter in her stomach. Yates held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish, but don't overexert yourself. You need to regain your strength." His concern touched her. It had been so long since anyone had worried about her well-being. "I'll be careful," she promised. They worked together to clean up, falling into an easy rhythm that felt oddly comfortable for two strangers. When the kitchen was tidy, Yates lit a lamp and handed it to her. "You should get some rest," he said. "Morning comes early on a ranch." "Good night, Mr. Grayson," she replied, "and thank you again for your kindness." "Yates," he corrected gently. "If we're to share a house, you might as well use my given name." "Yates," she repeated, testing the feel of it on her tongue. "Then you must call me Nora." He nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good night, Nora. Sleep well." As she climbed the stairs to her room, lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls, Nora marveled at the turn her fortunes had taken. This morning, she'd been at her lowest point, hungry and hopeless on church steps. Tonight, she had a full stomach, a clean bed, and employment with a man who seemed decent and fair. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Nora Keating fell asleep with hope in her heart. Nora woke to the sound of rain pattering against her window. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was: the comfortable bed, the clean room, the absence of other bodies pressed close in shared accommodations. Then memory returned. The church steps, Yates Grayson, the long ride to his ranch, gray morning light filtered through the curtains. She had no timepiece, but the quality of light suggested early morning. From somewhere below came the muffled sounds of movement: boots on wooden floors, the clank of cookware, a door opening and closing. She rose quickly, washed her face and hands in the basin, and dressed in her better garment, a navy blue cotton dress, worn at the elbows but still presentable. She pinned her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, wishing for a ribbon or ornament to make herself look more the part of a respectable housekeeper. But such vanities were luxuries she'd left behind long ago. Downstairs, she found Yates in the kitchen, wearing a rain slicker and pouring coffee into a tin cup. "Morning," he said, looking up with surprise. "Didn't expect you so early." "Good morning," she replied. "I'm used to rising with the sun," he gestured to the stove. "Coffee's hot." "Afraid I haven't started breakfast yet. Usually just grab something quick." "Please allow me," Nora said, moving toward the pantry. "That's why I'm here after all." Yates watched her with amusement as she familiarized herself with the kitchen, locating flour, sugar, eggs, and a slab of bacon. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Time is a luxury I haven't been able to afford lately," she replied, setting a cast iron skillet on the stove. "Do you prefer your eggs fried or scrambled?" "Fried, if it's no trouble." He leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. "I need to check on some calves born last week. This rain's got me worried. Should be back by midday." Nora nodded, slicing bacon into the heating pan. "I'll have a hot meal waiting." "Don't feel obliged to cook for the hands," he added. "They take their meals at the bunkhouse. Cookie handles that." Cookie? Samuel Cooper, our chuck wagon cook during cattle drives, keeps the men fed year-round. Crusty old fellow, but his biscuits would make angels weep. Yates smiled at some private memory. "You'll meet him soon enough. He comes up to the house sometimes to borrow supplies." As she cooked, Nora asked questions about the ranch's routine, mentally organizing her approach to managing the household. Yates answered between bites of the hearty breakfast. She served crisp bacon, eggs with perfectly runny yolks, and pan-fried potatoes seasoned with the dried herbs she'd found in the pantry. "This is delicious," he said, sopping up egg yolk with a piece of bread. "Best breakfast I've had in months." His sincere appreciation warmed her more than it should have. "It's simple fare," she demurred. "Simple done well is better than fancy done poorly," he replied, finishing his coffee. "I'd better get moving before this rain gets worse." After he left, pulling his hat low against the drizzle, Nora surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye. It was reasonably clean but poorly organized. She spent the morning rearranging cupboards, taking inventory of supplies, and making lists of items to be ordered or replaced. By mid-morning, the rain had intensified, drumming steadily on the roof. Nora moved her attention to the rest of the house, starting with the formal dining room. The large table was dusty, the silver tarnished, and the china cabinet looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. She found cleaning supplies in a hall closet and set to work. Hours passed as she lost herself in the familiar rhythm of housekeeping. There was comfort in bringing order to chaos, in transforming neglected spaces into something welcoming. By the time she heard the front door open around noon, she had cleaned the dining room, parlor, and was halfway through organizing the cluttered study. "Nora," Yates called. "In the study," she answered, turning from the bookshelf she'd been dusting. He appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from his slicker onto the recently swept floor. His expression changed from curiosity to amazement as he took in the transformation of the room. "Good Lord," he said. "I'd forgotten what color that rug was." Nora smiled, pleased by his reaction. "The house has good bones, as my mother would say. It just needs some attention." Yates shrugged off his wet coat and hung it on a peg near the door. "You've certainly given it that, but you didn't need to do so much on your first day." "I wanted to," she assured him. "It feels good to be useful again." Something in her words seemed to resonate with him, for he nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling all too well." He glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, which Nora had wound and set. "Is it really past noon already?" It is. Are you hungry? I was about to prepare lunch. Starving, he admitted. Got soaked checking on those calves. All fine, thankfully, but their mothers weren't keen on my presence. In the kitchen, Nora heated soup she'd found in the larder and sliced bread and cheese while Yates changed into dry clothes. When he returned, his dark hair was damp and combed back from his forehead, making him look younger, less weathered. "Something smells good," he said, taking a seat at the table. "Just soup and bread, I'm afraid," Nora replied, setting a steaming bowl before him. "I'll need to bake tomorrow." "Don't apologize. After a morning in the rain, hot soup is exactly right." He waited until she'd seated herself before beginning to eat, a courtesy that spoke of good upbringing. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Yates asked, "How are you finding everything so far?" "Well enough," Nora replied, "though I did notice the roof leaks in the upstairs hallway. There's a bucket catching the drips." Yates nodded grimly. "Been meaning to fix that, just haven't found the time." "I also found these," she continued, pulling a small stack of envelopes from her pocket. They were mixed in with old newspapers in the study. Some appear to be bills. He took the envelopes with a grimace. "Mrs. Jenkins used to remind me about these. Suppose that's part of your job now, too." "If you'd like me to handle correspondence and accounts, I'm certainly capable," Nora offered. "My father ensured I was educated in such matters." "That would be helpful," Yates admitted. "I'm better with cattle than paperwork." As the afternoon wore on, the rain showed no signs of abating. Nora continued her work inside, while Yates reluctantly returned to his duties outdoors. She found herself watching from windows whenever he crossed the yard, noting the way the ranch hands deferred to him, the confident set of his shoulders despite the miserable weather. By evening, she had prepared a substantial dinner of roasted chicken, potatoes, and carrots, using provisions from the well-stocked root cellar. The savory aroma filled the kitchen as Yates returned, looking exhausted but appreciative when he saw the table set for the meal. "This is becoming a habit I could get used to," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "Coming in from the cold to find hot food waiting. It's the least I can do," Nora replied, "considering your generosity." He turned to face her, drying his hands on a towel. "It's not generosity, Nora. It's fair exchange. You work, I pay you, no need to feel indebted." But she did feel indebted, and not just for the wages. He'd offered her dignity along with employment, treated her as a person of worth when the rest of the world had looked past her. How could she not feel grateful? Over dinner, Yates spoke of the ranch's operations, the challenges of the upcoming winter, plans for expanding the herd in spring, concerns about water rights with neighboring properties. Nora listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her quick intelligence and practical mind. "You know," Yates said as they finished eating, "you don't talk like someone who's been on hard times." Nora stiffened slightly. "How should someone on hard times talk, in your estimation?" He had the grace to look chagrined. "That came out wrong. I meant no offense, it's just. You've maintained a certain refinement that's unusual. Education and good manners cost nothing to maintain," she replied, softening her tone. "Though I admit there were times when I was tempted to abandon both." "I'm glad you didn't," Yates said quietly. "This house has lacked civilized conversation for too long." Later, as they sat in the parlor, Yates with a ledger book, Nora with mending she'd found in a basket, the domesticity of the scene struck her with unexpected force. How strange that she could feel so at ease in this place after just one day. How dangerous to let herself believe this arrangement could last, because experience had taught Nora Keating that good fortune was fleeting. Sooner or later, something would shatter this fragile peace. It always did. The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Nora rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning, organizing, and gradually transforming the neglected house into a proper home. Afternoons were devoted to cooking, mending, and managing the household accounts, which she discovered were in considerable disarray. Yates was gone much of the day, overseeing ranch operations, but they shared meals and often spent evenings in the parlor, he reading or working on accounts, she sewing or writing letters to suppliers. Their conversations grew longer and more personal as mutual respect developed into genuine friendship. She learned that Yates had indeed fought for the Confederacy, a reluctant soldier who'd inherited his father's plantation, but not his enthusiasm for the Southern cause. After the war, with his home confiscated and family fortune gone, he'd headed west like so many displaced veterans, determined to build a new life far from bitter memories. He learned that Nora had been engaged to a banker's son, who'd promptly dissolved their betrothal when her father's business failed. The heartbreak had been less about lost love than the painful revelation of the man's true character, and the subsequent discovery that many in her social circle were equally fair-weather friends. 2 weeks after her arrival, Nora stood in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the front door open, followed by unfamiliar voices. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the hallway to find Yates accompanied by a distinguished-looking older couple. "Ah, Nora," he said, his expression unusually animated. "Come meet Judge and Mrs. Hamilton. They're our nearest neighbors to the east, though near is relative out here. Their ranch is a good 5 miles away." "Miss Keating," the judge said, bowing slightly, "Yates has been singing your praises. Says you've single-handedly brought civilization back to this bachelor establishment." "Hardly that," Nora demurred, conscious of her flour-dusted apron and workday appearance. "But I do what I can." "What you can is considerable," Mrs. Hamilton said warmly. "This place was a positive disgrace the last time I visited. Now look at it clean as a whistle and smelling of baking bread instead of dirty boots." Yates laughed. "Margaret doesn't believe in mincing words, but she's right. The place hasn't looked this good since, well, ever." Mrs. Hamilton Margaret was studying Nora with keen interest. "My dear, you must join us for dinner on Saturday. We're having a small gathering, just a few neighbors. Nothing formal, but it would be a chance for you to meet some of the community." Nora hesitated, glancing at Yates. Such an invitation suggested she was being viewed as more than a servant, and she wasn't sure if that was appropriate. Sensing her uncertainty, Yates added, "You should go. You've more than earned a night of recreation." "Then I would be delighted," Nora replied, though inwardly she worried about having nothing suitable to wear for even an informal social occasion. After the Hamiltons departed, promising to send a buggy for her on Saturday evening, Nora returned to her bread-making with troubled thoughts. She had exactly 2 dresses, the one she was wearing and her marginally better one, which was still woefully inadequate for a dinner party. Later that afternoon, Yates found her in the sewing room, attempting to refresh her better dress with scraps of lace she'd discovered in Mrs. Jenkins' abandoned workbasket. "Making something new?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Nora looked up, embarrassed to be caught in such a transparent display of vanity. "Just trying to make this more presentable for Saturday. I don't want to embarrass you in front of your neighbors." Yates frowned. "You could never embarrass me, Nora." "That's kind of you to say, but we both know appearance matters in society, even frontier society." She set down her needle with a sigh. "Perhaps I should decline the invitation after all." "Nonsense," Yates said firmly. "Wait here." He disappeared upstairs, returning minutes later with a large wooden trunk which he set before her. "This belonged to my sister," he explained, opening the lid to reveal neatly folded garments. "Catherine was about your size. She visited for a summer before she married and moved to California. Left these things behind, said the trunks were too heavy to transport by stagecoach." Nora stared at the contents: dresses, shawls, petticoats, all of good quality and relatively current fashion. "I couldn't possibly, they're just gathering dust," Yates interrupted. "Catherine would be pleased to know they were being used, especially by someone who appreciates fine things." His thoughtfulness brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll take the greatest care with them." "They're yours now," he said simply. "Do with them as you wish." The matter-of-fact generosity of the gesture touched her deeply. It wasn't just about the clothing, though God knew that was generous enough. It was the recognition of her dignity, her womanhood beyond her role as housekeeper. Yates saw her needs before she voiced them, and met them without making her feel like a charity case. Saturday evening found Nora dressed in a sage green gown that complemented her chestnut hair and brought color to her still thin cheeks. The past 2 weeks of regular meals had begun to restore her health, softening the gaunt angles of her face and returning some luster to her complexion. When she descended the stairs, Yates was waiting in the entryway. He stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "You look beautiful," he said, the directness of the compliment making her blush. "The dress is doing most of the work," she replied lightly. "No," he shook his head. "It's you, Nora." The intensity in his blue eyes made her heart flutter, but before she could respond, the sound of an approaching buggy broke the moment. Yates helped her into her borrowed cloak and escorted her outside. "Aren't you coming?" she asked, surprised to see him step back after handing her into the Hamiltons' vehicle. "I've got business to attend to," he said, "but I'll come fetch you later if the weather holds." The dinner party was pleasant enough. The Hamiltons were gracious hosts, and their other guests, two neighboring ranchers with their wives and a young doctor recently arrived from Chicago, were welcoming to Nora. Yet she found herself watching the clock, eager to return to the ranch, to Yates. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she heard the unmistakable sound of his horse in the yard. Making her goodbyes, Nora allowed Yates to help her into the saddle, then waited as he mounted behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. Neither spoke as thunder carried them at an easy pace across the moonlit prairie. Nora was acutely aware of Yates's solid presence behind her, the warmth of his chest against her back, the careful way he held her. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he finally asked, his voice low near her ear. "Yes," she replied. "The Hamiltons are very kind, but—" She hesitated, then continued honestly, "I'm glad to be going home." Home, the word had slipped out unbidden, yet it felt right. In just 2 weeks, Grayson Ranch had become more of a home than any place she'd known since losing her parents. Yates's arms tightened slightly around her. "I'm glad to hear you say that," he murmured. "I've grown accustomed to having you there." The simple statement contained layers of meaning that Nora wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she leaned back slightly, allowing herself the comfort of his embrace as they rode through the star-washed night toward the place that was beginning to claim her heart. As autumn deepened toward winter, life at Grayson Ranch settled into a rhythm that brought Nora increasing contentment. The house was now immaculately maintained, meals were served promptly and well prepared, and even the ranch accounts were in perfect order. But more than the satisfaction of work well done, Nora found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of belonging somewhere again. Yates, too, seemed to flourish with her presence. He smiled more often, lingered longer at meals, and gradually shared more of himself, his hopes for the ranch, memories of his childhood in Virginia, even his dreams for the future. Sometimes Nora would catch him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken, but he maintained a respectful distance that was both reassuring and, increasingly, frustrating. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse that glittered in the winter sunlight. Nora stood at the kitchen window, admiring the beauty of it, when she heard Yates enter the house, stomping snow from his boots in the hallway. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said as he appeared in the doorway. "Like a painting." "Beautiful but treacherous," he replied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "We lost 2 calves last night. Would have been more if the boys hadn't worked through the dark, bringing the herd closer to the barn." Concern furrowed her brow. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "You already are," Yates said, warming his hands around the mug. Hot meals and a warm house make all the difference during weather like this. Their eyes met over the rim of his cup, and something shifted in the air between them, a current of awareness that had been building since that night ride home from the Hamiltons. Nora looked away first, busying herself with preparations for the midday meal. "I thought I'd make a venison stew," she said, her voice sounding overly bright to her own ears. "Something hearty for this cold weather." "Sounds perfect," Yates replied, his gaze still heavy on her back as she worked. After a moment, he added, "I've been meaning to ask you something, Nora." "Yes." She turned to face him, knife paused over the vegetables she'd been chopping. "The Hamiltons are hosting a Christmas gathering in 3 weeks. Nothing elaborate dinner, some music, perhaps a bit of dancing. Would you like to attend? With me, I mean, not as my housekeeper, but as my guest. The distinction wasn't lost on her. "Are you asking me to accompany you socially, Mr. Grayson?" she asked, reverting to formality to mask her sudden nervousness. "I am," he confirmed, setting down his coffee cup. "Though I'd prefer you called me Yates when accepting my invitation." His confidence made her smile despite herself. "And if I were to decline, then I'd hope you'd still call me Yates as a friend if nothing else." His expression grew more serious. "But I hope you won't decline." Nora considered the implications of accepting. Attending a social function as Yates Grayson's companion would signal to the community that their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee. Was she ready for that? Was he? "I would be honored to accompany you, Yates," she finally said. The smile that transformed his face was worth any risk. "Good," he said simply, but the warmth in that single word conveyed volumes. The days leading up to the Christmas gathering were filled with a subtle tension anticipation mingled with uncertainty, as both Nora and Yates navigated the changing nature of their relationship. They still maintained their established routines, but small things had shifted. His hand lingering on hers when passing a dish at dinner, her finding excuses to be in the same room with him in the evenings, conversations that stretched later into the night. On the evening of the party, Nora took special care with her appearance, selecting a deep burgundy dress from Catherine's trunk that complemented her now healthy complexion and fuller figure. 3 months of good food and reduced anxiety had restored her to something closer to her natural beauty. She arranged her hair in an elegant knot, secured with tortoiseshell pins also found among Catherine's belongings, and added a touch of rose water to her wrists and throat. When she descended the stairs, Yates was waiting in the parlor, dressed in a formal suit that highlighted his broad shoulders and trim waist. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the admiration in his eyes made her heart skip. "You are a vision, Nora Keating," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, equally quiet. "You look quite handsome yourself." He crossed to her and offered his arm. "Shall we?" The Hamiltons' home was ablaze with light, evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorning every available surface. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and roasting meat filled the air, and the sounds of laughter and music spilled from the open doors as Yates helped Nora from their sleigh. "Yates, Nora, welcome." Margaret Hamilton greeted them warmly, kissing Nora's cheek and clasping Yates's hand. "Come in out of the cold. Everyone's gathering in the parlor for punch before dinner." Throughout the evening, Nora was aware of Yates's protective presence beside her. He introduced her proudly to those she hadn't yet met, kept her glass filled, and ensured she was included in conversations. When the furniture was pushed back after dinner to allow for dancing, he led her onto the floor without hesitation. "I should warn you," Nora murmured as he placed one hand at her waist and took her other in his. "It's been some time since I've danced." "Just follow my lead," he replied, guiding her into a waltz as the small ensemble of local musicians struck up a tune. "Though I'm hardly an expert myself." But they moved together with surprising grace, as if their bodies recognized a natural harmony that their minds were still discovering. Nora relaxed into his hold, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of being held by this man who had come to mean so much to her. As the evening progressed, Nora noticed whispers and speculative glances from some of the other guests. While most were friendly, a few of the women regarded her with obvious curiosity or, in one case, thinly veiled disapproval. "Don't mind Mrs. Ellsworth," Yates murmured when he caught her noticing the older woman's pinched expression. "She had hopes of matching me with her niece last summer." "And were you interested?" Nora couldn't help asking. Yates chuckled. "The girl is barely 20 and more interested in fashion plates than conversation. I politely declined all invitations." "I see," Nora replied, oddly pleased by this information. "And now they think what they will," he interrupted gently. "Does it bother you?" She considered the question. "No," she decided, "though I wonder if it should. Life's too short to spend it worrying about what others think, especially out here." He guided her toward the punch bowl. "One thing I've learned in Montana, a person's worth is measured by their actions, not their pedigree or past." The simple wisdom of his statement resonated with Nora. Wasn't that exactly what she'd experienced? Yates had seen her at her lowest point, hungry, desperate, with nothing to recommend her but her dignity, and had offered her not just sustenance but respect. He judged her by her character, not her circumstances. The ride home that night was quiet but charged with unspoken emotion. The sleigh's runners whispered over the snow and their breath clouded in the frigid air. Yates had tucked warm buffalo robes around them, and Nora sat close beside him, grateful for his warmth. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, his voice low in the stillness. "Very much," she replied honestly. "The Hamiltons are wonderful hosts. They think highly of you," Yates said. "Margaret told me you've brought the light of civilization back to Grayson Ranch," Nora laughed. "Hardly that, I've just brought a woman's touch to a bachelor household." "It's more than that," he insisted. "You've brought life back to the place, and not just to the house." The implication hung in the air between them. Nora's heart beat faster as Yates drew the horses to a halt in front of the darkened ranch house. For a long moment, neither moved to leave the sleigh. "Nora," Yates finally said, turning to face her, "I need to say something, and I hope you'll hear me out." She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. "When I found you on those church steps 3 months ago, I had no intention beyond offering help to someone in need. I certainly didn't expect." He paused, searching for words. "I didn't expect to find myself thinking about you every moment we're apart, or watching the clock until I can return to the house to see your face again." "Yates," she whispered, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I know our situation is unusual. You came here as my employee, and I don't want you to feel any obligation beyond the terms of our agreement. If what I'm about to say makes you uncomfortable, we can forget this conversation ever happened and continue as before." He took a deep breath. "But I can't keep pretending that my feelings for you are merely those of an employer for a valued housekeeper, or even just those of a friend. The truth is, Nora Keating, I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the cold night air like frost crystals, beautiful, delicate, transformative. Nora stared at him, this man who had changed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. "If you don't feel the same," Yates continued, his voice roughening with emotion, "I'll understand. Your position here is secure regardless, but if there's any chance—" "Yes," Nora interrupted, reaching for his gloved hand. "Yes, there's a chance, more than a chance." She gathered her courage. "I love you too, Yates. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." The joy that bloomed on his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Yates leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss as gentle as a snowflake landing on skin. Yet it ignited something profound within her. When they parted, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he murmured. "Court you as you deserve to be courted, if you'll allow it." Nora smiled, happiness bubbling up within her like a spring thaw. "I would like that very much." They entered the house hand in hand, crossing a threshold that represented more than just a physical boundary. Whatever came next, they would face it together, no longer employer and employee, but two people who had found in each other the hope they thought they'd lost. The weeks following the Christmas party brought changes both subtle and profound to life at Grayson Ranch. True to his word, Yates courted Nora with old-fashioned propriety, bringing her wildflowers found sheltered in southern-facing ravines, reading to her in the evenings by the fire, taking her on sleigh rides across the snow-covered prairie on clear winter afternoons. Their interactions were measured, respectful, yet charged with growing affection. Kisses remained chaste, hands properly placed, yet both felt the deepening connection between them, a bond forged not just of physical attraction, but of genuine compatibility and mutual respect. January brought harsh weather that kept the ranch hands working around the clock to protect the cattle. Nora found herself not just maintaining the household, but helping to coordinate efforts to feed the workers, prepare remedies for frostbite and exhaustion, and even assist when a ranch hand was brought in with a broken arm after being thrown from his horse on the icy ground. "You have a natural gift for healing," Yates observed as he watched her splint the man's arm before the doctor could make the treacherous journey from town. "Where did you learn such skills?" "My mother," Nora replied, securing the bandages. She believed every woman should know basic medicine. Said you never knew when it might be needed. She smiled at the injured cowboy, a young man named Timothy. Keep this elevated and try not to move it. Dr. Jenkins will be here as soon as the weather allows. February brought milder temperatures and the first stirrings of ranch preparations for spring. Cattle were beginning to calve, keeping Yates and his men busy day and night. Often he would come in long after dinner, exhausted but exhilarated by new life arriving despite the winter's hardships. One such evening, as March winds howled outside, Yates found Nora in the parlor, mending by lamplight as she waited for his return. "You shouldn't have stayed up," he said, dropping into the chair opposite hers. "It's past midnight." "I wanted to," she replied simply. "Are you hungry?" "There's stew keeping warm." "Starving," he admitted, "but too tired to move just yet." Nora set aside her mending and studied his face in the lamplight. Fatigue had etched lines around his eyes, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. Yet there was a contentment in his expression that made him handsome despite the weariness. "You love this life, don't you?" she asked softly, despite all its hardships. Yates considered her question seriously. "I do," he finally said. "It's not an easy existence, but there's honesty in it. Each day brings challenges that must be met head-on. There's no hiding behind social niceties or pretensions out here." "No," Nora agreed. "The elements don't care about one's background or bank account." "Exactly." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "What about you, Nora? These past months, has this life been bearable for you? I know it's far different from what you were raised to expect." The question carried weight beyond its surface meaning. Nora understood he was really asking if she could be happy with him, with this life, permanently. "More than bearable," she assured him. "When I first came west, I was running away from painful memories. I had no real destination in mind, just a vague notion that somewhere I might find a place to belong again." She met his gaze steadily. "I've found that here, Yates, with you." The simple declaration hung between them, honest and unadorned as the life they were discussing. Yates rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Nora Keating," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I love you. Not just for how you've transformed this house into a home, or for the grace with which you've adapted to this hard country. I love your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. I love who I am when I'm with you." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to hope for this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. Tears welled in her eyes as she answered, "Yes, Yates, with all my heart, yes." He rose slightly, just enough to take her face between his hands and kiss her a kiss deeper and more passionate than their previous tentative exchanges, a seal on the promise they had just made to each other. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "Haven't been to town in weeks." "I don't need a ring," Nora assured him, "just you." But Yates insisted on doing things properly. The following week, despite continuing demands on the ranch, he rode into Whispering Creek and returned with a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "It reminded me of your eyes," he said as he slipped it onto her finger that evening. "Not flashy, but deep and true." News of their engagement spread quickly through the scattered community. Margaret Hamilton immediately began planning a celebration, despite Nora's protests that something simple would suffice. "Nonsense," the older woman declared when she visited the ranch to discuss arrangements. "Yates Grayson is one of the most eligible bachelors in the territory. His wedding deserves proper recognition." She patted Nora's hand. "Besides, my dear, this is as much for you as for him. I want everyone to see you as you truly are, the woman who captured his heart, not the housekeeper who became his bride." Nora appreciated the sentiment, though she cared little for social validation. Her happiness was rooted in Yates's love and respect, not in others' perceptions of their relationship. As winter reluctantly gave way to spring, Nora and Yates agreed to a May wedding. The ceremony would be held at the small church in Whispering Creek, the very place where they had first met, followed by a celebration at the Hamiltons' home. "Seems fitting," Yates commented as they discussed the plans one evening, coming full circle to where it all began. Those church steps changed my life, Nora agreed softly. Though I couldn't have imagined how completely at the time, April brought the full intensity of spring work on the ranch. Cattle needed moving to summer pastures, new calves required branding, and endless repairs awaited after winter's damage. Yates was often away from dawn until dusk, sometimes overnight when the herd was moved to distant grazing lands. During one such absence, as Nora was preparing the guest room for Yates's sister Catherine, who would be arriving from California for the wedding, she came across a small wooden box tucked away on a high shelf in the closet. Curiosity overcoming her usual respect for privacy, she opened it to find a collection of daguerreotypes and letters. The photographs showed a younger Yates in his Confederate uniform, standing beside comrades, and later images of him with various ranch hands during the early days of establishing Grayson Ranch. But it was a portrait of a beautiful young woman that caught Nora's attention. On the back, in faded ink, was written, Elizabeth, 1866. Nora carefully replaced the items and closed the box, but the discovery lingered in her mind. Yates had never mentioned an Elizabeth, yet he had kept her portrait. The date, 1866, was just after the war, before he established the ranch. That evening, when Yates returned from checking fence lines in the north pasture, Nora prepared his favorite meal beef stew with dumplings and waited until they were relaxing by the fire before broaching the subject. I found a box of photographs today, she began carefully. While preparing the guest room, I hope you don't mind that I looked. Yates stiffened slightly but didn't appear angry. Old memories, he said after a moment, some best left in the past. There was a portrait of a woman named Elizabeth, Nora continued gently. She was very beautiful. A shadow crossed Yates's face. Yes, she was. When he didn't elaborate, Nora asked, was she someone important to you? Yates stared into the fire for a long moment. She was my fiancée, he finally said. After the war, when I had nothing left but my name and the clothes on my back, Elizabeth agreed to marry me anyway. We were going to head west together, start fresh. He sighed heavily. She died of typhoid fever 2 weeks before our wedding day. Oh, Yates, Nora breathed, her heart aching for his long-ago loss. I'm so sorry. He reached for her hand, holding it tightly. It was a lifetime ago. I grieved her deeply, then eventually packed away those memories along with her portrait. His eyes, when they met Nora's, were clear and direct. Finding you has awakened parts of me I thought had died with her. But what I feel for you isn't a replacement or a second choice. It's entirely new, a love for the woman you are, not for memories of what might have been. The honest declaration banished any nascent insecurities Nora might have harbored. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, for sharing that part of yourself. Yates lifted her hand to his lips. No more secrets between us, Nora. The past has shaped us both, but it's the future that matters now, our future. The weeks before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Catherine arrived from California, a vivacious woman with Yates's blue eyes and direct manner, who embraced Nora as a sister from their first meeting. Judge Hamilton agreed to give Nora away in the absence of her father, and Margaret took charge of ensuring the church and celebration would be perfect down to the last detail. On the morning of her wedding day, Nora stood in her bedroom at Grayson Ranch, gazing out the window at the landscape that had become home. Spring had transformed the prairie into a sea of green, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the gentle May breeze. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, and ranch hands moved among them, their work continuing despite the special occasion. A knock at the door preceded Catherine's entrance. "Are you ready?" she asked, carrying a beautiful ivory dress over her arm. Margaret sent this over. It was her daughter's wedding gown, but she never had a granddaughter to pass it on to. She hoped you might wear it today. Nora touched the fine fabric with trembling fingers. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Catherine interrupted, echoing her brother's words from that first meeting on the church steps. "Margaret would be heartbroken if you refused." She laid the dress carefully on the bed. "Besides, you're family now." Accepting such gifts is part of belonging. Family. The word resonated deeply within Nora. After years of being alone, she was joining not just with Yates, but with a community that had accepted her as one of their own. With Catherine's help, Nora dressed in the borrowed gown, which fit as if made for her. Her hair was arranged with white rosebuds from Margaret's greenhouse, and around her neck hung the locket containing her parents' portraits her past embraced within her present. When she descended the stairs, Judge Hamilton waited in the entryway, resplendent in his formal attire. His eyes misted as he beheld her. "My dear girl," he said, offering his arm, "you are a vision. Yates is a fortunate man indeed." The ride to town passed in a blur of anticipation. As their carriage approached the church, Nora was struck by the sight of people gathered outside, not just invited guests, but townsfolk, who had come to witness the marriage of one of the territory's most respected ranchers. And there, on the very steps where hunger and desperation had once driven her to sit, stood Yates Grayson, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression one of barely contained joy as he watched her carriage approach. Judge Hamilton helped her down, and the crowd parted to create a path to the church steps. Nora's eyes never left Yates's face as she walked toward him, her heart so full she thought it might burst from her chest. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, uncaring of tradition or proper procedure. "You are the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was making," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed silence. "When I placed food in your lap that day, I had no idea you would place such hope in my heart." Tears welled in Nora's eyes at the beautiful sentiment. "And when I accepted that food, I could never have imagined I was accepting a future filled with such love." Together, they turned and entered the church, no longer the desperate woman and the compassionate cowboy of their first meeting, but partners stepping forward into a shared life, one built on respect, understanding, and a love that had begun with the simplest act of human kindness. The ceremony itself was brief but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not just love and fidelity but partnership and respect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates's kiss was both tender and possessive, a public declaration of their bond that brought approving smiles from their assembled friends. The celebration at the Hamiltons' home lasted well into the evening. There was feasting and dancing, laughter and tears, as the community gathered to honor not just a marriage but the kind of love story that gave hope to everyone who witnessed it. As twilight settled over the land, Yates led Nora away from the festivities to a quiet corner of the garden where the scent of lilacs filled the air. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "are you happy?" Nora reached up to touch his beloved face. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she assured him. "And you, I thought I knew what happiness was," he replied, drawing her close. "But this, what I feel with you, is beyond anything I could have imagined." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate hunger to fulfilled hope, from loneliness to love, from two separate broken paths to one shared road forward. "Take me home, Yates," she whispered against his lips. "Take me home." And he did, to the ranch that was now truly theirs together, to the life they would build side by side, to the future that had begun that day on the church steps, when a hungry woman had received not just food but the first seeds of hope that would blossom into lasting love. 5 years later, Nora Grayson stood on the wide porch of Grayson Ranch, watching as Yates swung their 3-year-old daughter Rose onto his shoulders. Their son James, nearly 5, raced around them in excited circles, waving a small wooden horse his father had carved for him. "Papa, higher." Rose demanded, her chubby hands holding tight to Yates's hat. "Any higher and you'll touch the sky, little one," Yates laughed, securing her with strong hands on her tiny legs. The sight of them, her husband and children illuminated by the golden light of a Montana sunset, filled Nora's heart with such joy it was almost painful. How far she had come from that desperate woman on the church steps of Whispering Creek. Grayson Ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. The cattle operation had expanded, with Yates introducing new breeding stock that improved the herd's quality and resistance to harsh winters. Nora had established a productive kitchen garden and small orchard, providing fresh produce for their table and preserves to see them through winter months. They had built a school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteads, with Nora teaching basic reading, writing, and arithmetic 3 days a week. Her background in business had also proven valuable as she helped manage the ranch's increasingly complex finances. But their greatest achievements were less tangible: the love that had deepened with each passing year, the family they had created together, the community they had helped to nurture in this remote corner of Montana territory. As Yates approached the porch with their children, Nora smiled at the man who had transformed her life with a simple act of kindness on a Sunday morning long ago. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" he asked, setting Rose down to run after her brother. "I was thinking about how it all began," Nora replied, accepting his kiss as he climbed the steps to join her. "About hunger and hope." Yates nodded, understanding immediately. He wrapped an arm around her waist, drawing her against his side as they watched their children play in the yard. "From the moment I saw you on those steps, something told me you were meant to be part of my life," he confessed. "I just didn't know then how completely you would become my life." "God works in mysterious ways," Nora murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. "Had my journey been easier, had I found work in another town, had you attended church an hour later that day?" She let the possibilities trail off, too many to enumerate. "I don't believe it was chance," Yates said firmly. "Some things are meant to be, regardless of the path taken to reach them." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps their souls had been destined to find each other, across war and loss and hardship, across miles and years and circumstances that should have kept them apart. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps it was just the natural result when one person recognizes the humanity in another and responds with compassion rather than indifference. When food is placed in a hungry lap and hope is kindled in a weary heart. Whatever forces had brought them together, Nora was eternally grateful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she silently renewed the vows she had made 5 years earlier to love this man, to cherish their family, to never take for granted the precious gift of their shared life. "Mama, Papa, look what I found." James called, running toward them with something clutched in his small hands. Together, Nora and Yates stepped forward to meet their son, ready to share in his discovery, just as they had shared everything else: the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges of building a life together in this wild, beautiful land that had become home. And in that moment, surrounded by the family she had once thought impossible, Nora knew with absolute certainty that no hunger could compare to the satisfaction of love fulfilled, and no hope could surpass the reality of dreams come true.